Everybody, Sean here from the Black Page. I'm sitting with none other than Jojo Mayer. Jojo,
hello.
Nice to see you. So we're doing a little clinic here with Sonar, and Jojo's going to enlighten us a little bit. Jojo, one thing I've always been curious about is your first name.
Mayer?
No, Jojo.
Jojo.
Where does it come from?
Well, I grew up. My dad is a musician, and I spent the first couple of years of my childhood on the road, and because I was born in Switzerland, but I spent my life in English, Chinese, Asian. Like I grew up in Hong Kong and Italy, so I was growing up in a multi-language environment,
right.
predominantly English, Swiss German, and Italian. And when I started to talk, my real name is Serge, and they called me Sergio, and I wasn't able to pronounce my own name, so I simplified it. I turned it into Jojo. So my parents started called me Jojo, and then Jojo turned into Jojo.
Great.
And my friends call me Jojo.
There you go. In your latest clinic, you've been using this new pedal you've had out for but over a year now it's been out.
Well, more than that, maybe 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
I mean, it's like there's like a developing phase was more than a year and a half, so maybe 2.5 years, but until everything was fine-tuned and it was ready for release.
Right. Yeah.
So it came out a year ago, but before that, for a year and a half, I played it and fine-tuned and tweaked it.
Right. Curious. One of the things I really loved about it when I heard that you can all the sizes of the bolts is all standard sizes.
Yeah. Well, that's the pedal is really made with the working musician in mind. And many times I've been on the road, and then maybe I lose a screw or something like that, and then when you have proprietary screws, you go to and you're on the road and something goes wrong, you go to a music store and go, well, we can special order it or whatever.
Right.
So that's why I decided to use all standard size screws, so you can go into any hardware store if anything goes wrong and you're set.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about getting a special order in. The other thing too about your playing and your setup even. You spend a lot of time playing in electronica and in that realm, but it was curious to me is you don't use any electronic drums at all.
Well, I mean,
not that I've seen
no, I don't. It's not that I don't use electronic. I have a lot of electronic drums, but a lot of stuff is vintage stuff. Like in the studio, I use electronic drums from the 70s and the 80s. Stuff like syncussions and move drums. Yeah. But these are a pain to travel around with. They're a high maintenance machine. It's super temperamental, and they're not good for So I've been using an old D drum brain from the early 90s. Which has been my workhorse. It's very reliable and it triggers really fast. But somehow the problem with electronic drums is the accessibility, and I can't really. It's just too slow. They're not there yet, and I don't think it's like electronic companies are not, or the companies are not able to create that type of drum set.
Right.
But the focus is not there. The focus basically is to create practice pads with sounds.
Yeah.
So people can practice in their homes, and the focus is not to create a musical instrument, because a lot of those things that are available on the market right now, for my own taste, don't really provide the specs that would somehow how should I say that qualify it as a musical instrument, because you can't really create things as a fine-tuned touch, which on the old analog drums I can do that. So the accessibility as far as the architecture of those instruments is very tedious. It's like those digital menus that you have to step through, and the sounds are not very good. The sounds are very kind of dated and bland, and I mean, if if you compare like the sound of like a Moog drum with like,
Right.
you know, any of the companies can pretty much go home, you know. It doesn't compare. It's like those old things sound so much better.
Yeah.
And they're so much more fun to work with.
Right.
So I think the problem is, I will get into electronic drums when more of like open source architecture is provided, you know, where I can actually create more personalized sounds, you know, and more interesting sounds, which I can't really do. So like what I do is I use a lot of outboard gear to process my drums live when I play with my band Nerf, you know. That's the alley that I'm taking right now, you know.
Right.
I'm not saying that I'm against playing electronic drums, but they're just not good enough now.
It's not. Yeah, it's not where. It's funny because I talked to Ed Mann about that too, and Ed honestly is. I mean, he's been around electronics all his life, and he said that for him it's about right now the companies are emulating, whereas he wants an instrument that he can make music.
Yeah, and I'm not interested in that, you know, because if I want to play electronic drums and I want to do something that I cannot do with like the acoustic drums, I mean, I'm getting more into, you know, some of the you know, user instruments, you know, like, you know, the stuff that like Ableton is like producing right now, and then see there's a pool of talent that works with those type of machines. So in order to be able, for me to be able to communicate with that new generation like musician, I'm getting more into it, you know, more deeply into it. But right now it's just like it doesn't, you know, it doesn't really touch me at that point. So that I want to get into it, you know.
So I'm curious to know then, growing up, I mean, you're primarily self-taught, and by that I mean you're just, I mean, did you have formal lessons?
Never.
So a lot of it was practical experience, listening or watching.
Trial and error.
Trial and error.
I mean, I started to play music, playing along with records, basically, around my parents' house. It was always music. I was fortunate. I heard a lot of music, anything from jazz to rock and Latin music, classical music. So I played along with records, R&B records, and the Beatles and blah blah blah, you know. So that's how I learned to play, and like later on when I was a teenager, I transcribed a lot of music, like I transcribed like Billy Cobham solos and stuff like that, like hours and hours of stuff. So that's how I deconstructed some of those, my heroes, and then I learned, I imitated to do what they did. That's how I learned.
And so that to me that would be a good, I mean, I know for myself, if I start writing something down, it's for some reason I'm more cognitive of how that works. It's like you map it out a little bit.
I mean, you know, I don't really think that, you know, like the actual writing down is the important part, but the listening and the understanding part is important, you know.
Yeah, you're connecting somehow, you know, physically. So who were some of your first, that you remember, your first favorite drummers or your first inspirations?
Probably Ringo.
Yeah, like everyone, right?
Probably Ringo, and then like later on, it was the drummers in my bands, in my dad's bands, you know, because it was guys that I don't know, when I was 5, 6 years old, you know, and I could have a relationship. And then later on, you know, it was like people like Buddy Rich, and then I went into a phase. I have to admit, like, you know, I was into like Emerson, Lake and Palmer and stuff like that. It's like the 70s. But then I was kind of quickly whipped out of that when I saw Mahavishnu for the first time, you know, like called him, like it blew my world. And then, you know, all these fusion drummers, but then also Bonham. And then I guess it was, you know, like the first drummer that really kind of provided me with this super key experience. I mean, the guy who broke my heart, literally, was Tony Williams, I guess. You know, that was the game changing when I started to understand what he does. You know, then it was like, I went a straightforward path to kind of like decode everything that he did. You know,
turn that light on for you.
Absolutely, you know. But you know, a lot of guys. It was, you know, like Stuart Copeland, and you know, and Peter Erskine, all the drummers with Weather Report, you know, like Omar Hakim was an influence, you know, like obviously Vinny Colaiuta, you know, when he first came out with Zappa, that was really impressive. But you know, all the James Brown drummer, all the Motown guys, you know, and all that stuff too, you know. So
I'm curious to know about you're living in New York now.
And 25 years.
Yeah, 25 years. And you've got I'm not sure if it's recent, but your Prohibited Beats.
I haven't been, no, I have, Prohibited Beats is that, I did that like 15 years ago.
Was it 15? Okay, all right.
Yeah, I occasionally, you know, do things like that, but you know, but I did that for 3 years in the late 90s.
Okay.
You know, that was kind of like the kickstarting this idea. You know.
Of the whole, like the drum and bass. So what for you moved you from kind of a jazz to, I mean, it wasn't, obviously it wasn't just one thing, but to move from the jazz into the drum and bass, and now into some of the areas you're going, which is somewhat uncharted.
Well, mainly it was the realization that jazz had its day. You know, it's not, you know, I still love the music, but the community will not create anything, or didn't create anything new or exciting for me. It became more and more like classical music, where you couldn't really, you know, like the scope or the era where you could be creative became more and more restrictive, you know. And then drum and bass came on in the early 90s. It was kind of like, okay, all of a sudden everything was open again, you know. And that drew me to that genre of music, you know. And I think still up to this day, you know, like the subculture in electronic music provides the most interesting new impulses, you know, whatever. If it's like now it's more dubstep, or, you know, like the Brain Feeder people are doing, or, you know, Flying Lotus and those things. That's when I hear freshness, you know.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, there's good rock and roll bands. I mean, you know, I like, you know, whatever, the Black Keys, and, you know, there's good stuff still going on, but, you know, the problem with jazz is that like academia has kind of like incapacitated, culturally speaking, or in terms of cultural relevance. Academia has clipped the wings of jazz. You know, it can't fly anymore as a cultural movement. There's still great musicians, and there's still good stuff. And with rock and roll, it's the business that screwed it up. You know, it's like, one of the key elements of rock and roll for me has always been like rebellion, and like going against the grain, and, you know, and disagreeing, and you know, being against what is told you to be right, you know. And nobody does this anymore, you know. I mean, like John Lennon and Frank Zappa and Jim Morrison and Hendrix and all these people, they changed this stuff, you know. And today rock and roll is hairstyle, you know. Image. Predominantly, you know. I'm not saying that there's still talent, you know, like Jack White and stuff like that, but, you know, it's the community is kind of screwed up, you know.
And it's safe to say maybe too that I know Ed Mann had said this of Zappa, that when you became too safe with Zappa's stuff, that's when he moved on. Yeah. That's when he was done with it. You know, when you understood it, then is it safe to say that you're looking always for that? Yeah,
well, yeah, I'm actually, this is really well put. I would say, you know, I'm interested in the moment of the Big Bang, where, like, the ignition. You know, it must have been an incredible experience to be around like Louis Armstrong, you know, in like 1928, you know, when they created jazz, you know. And then it must have been really amazing when you were around like Fletcher Henderson and Duke Ellington, when they created this, you know. And then it must have been really amazing when after the big band era, when all the trios started to happen, you know, like, you know, Oscar Peterson, or, you know, Bill Evans, and this Ahmad Jamal, you know, that was a new art form. And then Charlie Parker, you know, or Coltrane, and, you know, that was always like this new thing where people went like, what the fuck is this? That is the most interesting, you know, when people go like, what is this, you know? That's the moment that interests me the most. So in that respect, I can quote like Gustav Mahler, you know, the classical composer, which is one of my favorite classical composers. He once said, don't pray to the ashes, pass on the fire. So in that respect, you know, disregarding if it's Mozart or Bach or Stravinsky or Charlie Parker or Jimi Hendrix or the Police or Aphex Twin, you know, it's like, for me it's all the same. It's like an expression of what's going on. You know, it's reflecting the zeitgeist. So I see myself as, you know, someone that is drawn to that. You know, like I see myself as I mean, I'm very interested in the past and history, but you know, I'm about the future. You know, I'm looking forward.
Because that's where you live in the future. Yeah. So what do you have coming up in the next few months? Where can people check you out, see you?
Well, I've been doing a lot of touring. Like last year, I've been doing like 150,000 miles, and I'm a little bit tired right now. So when I get back to New York, I'll do a little bit of session work. I mean, there's not much left, you know. It's kind of, session work is also kind of like a thing of the last century, but there's still a little bit going on. So I'll be back in New York a little bit more. I'll work on some new music with Nerve.
Okay.
I'll record some new material. Then I'll start working on principal shooting very soon for Secret Weapon Part 2, which is everything below the waist.
No, nice.
Yeah. So all the footwork and stuff like that. So I'll be doing that, and well, that will keep me busy up until like fall. And in fall, I will be starting to do some more touring in Asia and Europe. You know, and throughout the summer, we do a couple of sprinkled gigs with Nerve, like festivals and stuff like that. So that's what's coming up right now.
Fans can visit you online, jojomayer.com.
Yeah, if you want to know where I mean, jojomayer.com is mostly points you into the direction of what I do with Nerve.
Right, that's right. Okay, yeah.
You know, which as I say, is like has been a little bit quiet over the past like 7-8 months. I'm doing so many other things. I'll do, you know, I did different things. That I did a project with a big band. It's been 25 years since Buddy Rich's passing.
That's right. Yeah.
So I just came back from Europe doing a Buddy Rich memorial project. You know, playing this music, which was kind of like nice. It's not something that I have been doing for, I don't know, many years. But it's kind of nice. It's like going into a time machine and revisit my roots. You know.
Yeah, that's right.
To some degree.
Jojo, I want to thank you very much, my friend.
Thank you.
Black Page readers, like, tweet, comment, send it on YouTube, whatever you want to do. See you guys later.